Please welcome Congressman Kevin Hearn. Semafor's senior Washington editor, Alana Shore, joins to lead this interview.
Good to see you, sir. Joining me on stage today is Congressman Kevin Hearn, Oklahoma Republican. Not only does he lead the Republican Study Committee, but he has firsthand franchise owner experience. Before coming to Congress, he owned more than 20 McDonald's restaurants across Oklahoma. So thank you for being here today, Congressman.
It's wonderful to be with you.
I want to start with a newsy topical question about your weekend. You were in Mar-a-Lago with many fellow House Republicans talking with President-elect Trump. You know, and we saw photos from it on social media. We saw some reports about what was discussed from behind the scenes, but firsthand source here, what's something surprising that happened that people may not know about?
Well, I think most see his personality and think he doesn't ever listen to anyone, but that's quite the opposite of that. You know, as a person who spent his lifetime in business and still in business, he knows the value of listening to all the opinions, but ultimately he has to make a decision. So this weekend was to get sort of all sides of the Republican conference in place, starting Friday, all day Saturday, and then last night, or Sunday night rather, dinner with about 20 of us to discuss both the policies and then the process of getting those policies through the House and the Senate.
And of course, those policies will largely at this point probably be accomplished through a reconciliation bill. I'm sure that was a key topic of discussion. There's a lot of dispute going on the Hill and a lot of talk about one beautiful bill, as the president-elect puts it, versus two bills. Quite a few senators want to go the two-bill track, and most House members, yourself included, are backing the one big beautiful bill notion. You know, at what point do you think you might need to pivot to a two-bill track, though, if one bill can't pass? We've heard the speaker say, let's do this by, early May. Should the cutoff be a little later than that in your view, or no cutoff at all? Just keep going, eyes on the prize.
Yeah, I think it's, a lot of you report on the Hill and politics and legislative process. I will tell you, I was telling Joe Erlinger, his daughter, wherever she's at, she's going to Georgetown, going through political science, and I said, it's like exception-based learning. You learn everything in college about politics except for what actually is what happens in politics and the legislative process. There are a lot of different things to look at. Two bills, the semantics of two-bill notion. Does that mean a bill that's wrapped around the appropriations opportunities we have on by March 14th for funding the government? You also have an issue with the disaster in California, how you're going to need to deal with that. Southern border issues, where you have many of our Democrat colleagues that are wanting to do something because they know that that was pivotal in this election. And so how do you bundle that all up, not in a reconciliation package, but and also the debt limit, by the way.
California, how you're going to deal with that.
Which, just the level set, the debt limit is about paying for what we've already incurred, not future indebtedness. Make sure that's gotten out. So how do you take all those five components and put them into a package, not necessarily a reconciliation bill, but in a package, but still do, quote, the one big beautiful bill through the reconciliation process that has budget, releasing the energy
so how do you take all those five
components
and put them into
backfill
a package
and replace Europe buying gas from Russia or oil from Iran? And so not depleting what we're doing in the United States. We're still the largest producer of energy in the world, but how do we add another 3 million barrels a day? If you look at Secretary nominee, what he's wanting to do as far as 3 million barrels extra a day. And then finally, how do we get what's probably most important to everybody in this room is the tax package extended for not corporation, but small businesses, so they don't have to look at even moving to a corporation status. And then for all of us as individuals, regardless of party, we're going to do it at the marginal rates.
So given all of that,
Sounds easy, right?
You got your work cut out for you. It sounds like what you're describing is a scenario where, some of what we might assume might be tackled in reconciliation, the debt limit being an example, doesn't end up there, right? And it's a one big beautiful bill it's kind of tax and energy focused, and you have a bigger debate in the spring on other stuff. But just the same, the president-elect wants results, right? Is there any concern among you backers of one bill that too much of a delay will kind of look like slower momentum on this tax plan?
Well, again, I think if you pull some of these out and you use, this place works incredibly well on deadlines. We're not really good at seeing the future. We see the future, we just don't act upon it. We let the next administration or the next Congress or the next group of senators deal with it. But the reality is that we do have a deadline on March 14th. We do have an upcoming, suspension opportunity of the debt ceiling, or a date certain, or a dollar certain on the debt limit. These are all things that we see, and they're imminent. Regarding the reconciliation package, and again, I know this sounds complex, but how do you get monies in the border, from the border, monies from energy and commerce and things around the energy that will pay for a lot of our tax extensions? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, everybody's got to be gravely concerned about the deficits and the debt in this country. And if you look at the skyrocketing T-bill issue with interest, every 1% we increase the interest on the debt, that's $360 billion added to the deficit every single year.
To dig in on another aspect of this tax debate, I'm going to read a quote. Last June, when asked about extending the TCJA, you said, quote, "The economic times are different than they were in 2017 when the bill was first passed. Obviously, inflation has grown greatly, and the debt is also growing." Today, with that in mind, do you support making all of the 2017 bill permanent, or would you be open to what some of your colleagues have suggested, namely potentially a slightly higher corporate rate, other ways to raise revenue that might change the terms?
Well, certainly the corporate rate is, you have to look at three things. I'm a pretty simple guy. I've been in business. I was in the franchising world. You mentioned McDonald's, 35 years. I still have a lot of businesses, or I should qualify for everybody in the room. My wife has all the businesses. It's really what I do early in the morning, looking at the business sector, because that's what keeps me sane in this place. But when you state unequivocally that you're going to keep everything in place, I think that's a paramount to be disappointed. But on the corporate rate, it's not expiring, so there's no even debate right now. You'd have to physically go crack that nut, open it up to actually do something with it. Then what you have to look at is the corporate rate is about how you play on the global field, the global competitiveness field. I actually chair the working group for Ways and Means on international tax. I have the entire international tax world in my working group. And so when you look at China as an example, our largest competitor economically, their corporate rate, their stated corporate rate is 25%, and they also do special rates for specific areas that they want to entice to come to China. If you take our 21% corporate rate and you add an average of about 4.5% across the nation for state taxes on there, it's about 25.5%. So we are now currently competitive with China, our global competitor, closest economy, closest GDP in the world. For us to start raising at 2 or 3 points, there is no reason to think that China would raise theirs, which makes it even more enticing to move to China. So we have to look at that. When you look at Section 199A, which applies to most of, if not all, your franchisees across the country, and some 30 million small businesses, the issue with that is that you don't want to force small businesses to have to make a decision on their structure based on the tax code. Happens all the time, but we don't want to be the ones to do that. And Section 199A only works if the marginal rates are kept where they're at. That's how you get the blend to have some sort of an equivalent of net tax of small business, S-Corp, LLCs, and be equivalent to a C-Corp. So I think, again, just to really make this simple, is keep the corporate rate at 21%, keep the marginal rates for all Americans the same, and keep 199A in place. Look at that as what's driving the economy, then think about things you can add on to that makes the economy go faster, not slower.
Interesting. Obviously, though, there will be the question of, if there's no revenue raised versus through possible changes in the rates, spending cuts that might be able to offset the cost. Where do you think Republicans should be looking? You've got DOGE looking, obviously, all over the federal government. You've got some folks saying it's time to take a look at entitlements, particularly maybe Medicare, Medicaid. Where do you stand on that?
Well, for the last 4 years, the only 4 budgets that have been explicitly put out and had to defend are from the Republican Study Committee. And the first 2 in the last 4 years, I did as the budget task force chairman under then RSC chairman Jim Banks, now Senator Banks. And then the last 2 years as chairman of the Republican Study Committee. And in there, we lay out the hard facts. Just to give you the hard facts, 4 years ago, you would had to cut $13 trillion in 10 years to balance the budget. And then it was about 14.5 trillion 3 years ago. Last year was about 16 trillion. This year is about 17.1 trillion. So I don't think it's any mystery to see that it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And it's only going to be exponentially worse if the interest rates continue to rise at the rate they're rising, and the debt continues to be this insurmountable number. So I think you have to look at everything, because for those that are not aware of this, all you're seeing us fuss and fight about up here is about 25% of all revenues generated in the United States. The other 75% are on so-called autopilot, mandatory spending. By the way, for all the constitutional people in this room and the people who care about it, I would challenge you to go find somewhere in the Constitution that says that there's mandatory and discretionary spending. It says all spending. But yet we don't want to tackle that because of the political warfare that will happen if you go actually address the problem. You mentioned entitlements. I think if you think about the word entitlement, Social Security and Medicare is in its truest definition entitlement. We all in our entire lives have given the federal government money, and we're entitled to get it back with a return as we've loaned that money to make sure that our future generations, including ourselves, are secure in our retirement. The problem is the formulas that generated those securities are outdated. When Social Security was created in 1935, there were something like 50 people working for every person retiring. Today, it's like 7 or 8. And Medicare pays for an escalating underlying cost of health insurance that's going through the roof. It's our largest spend in the United States. So we have to sit down in a bipartisan way and have what I was sharing with President McDonald's just a minute ago, what we had back in 2002 when McDonald's was in really a bad place, when everybody thought McDonald's couldn't fail, and their stock was at $12 a share. And we came together and we said, we have to have a plan to win. We in Congress, House and Senate and the White House, and all Americans need to have a plan to win. We're going to find ourselves not in a good spot in another decade.
I mean, fair enough. Good points on the details. You said the word bipartisan, though. It's going to be tough to get Democrats to the table on this. How do you envision that taking shape?
Well, again, I think it takes, I know this is crazy, but, I'm my long time in leadership, I think you have to lay out a great plan, and you can't be demonizing one another and at the same time asking for support. And it happens all the time. We've been given, as I've shared on many interviews over the last 2 or 3 weeks, we as Republicans have been given the gift of opportunity and not the gift of time. The opportunity is we can't blame the Democrats for not getting something done. When you have the House, the Senate, and the White House, it's time to come together. And if you truly believe in limited government, then you have to be limited in your government. If you truly believe in national security, then you have to secure the southern border, make sure you have a strong military to protect us from bad adversaries around the world. You have to do these things. You can't talk about them. And every day that we go by post January 20th, we're not getting things done. And we don't need to look at anybody else other than ourselves. And I don't have a problem. I just got elected in leadership in the Republican conference as the policy chair. I think, as I've told everybody, and I say this often, I hate politics, I really do, because it gets in the way of good policy. And there are a lot of Democrats, there are a lot of Republicans that work together every single day about how to move this country forward. But in the press, we don't talk about those things, because that's not cool. That doesn't sell ads. I'm just being very frank, and I've said this on many a different station or to people sitting in editorial boards. If you would report on the successes of bipartisanship, you'd be amazed what you could get done in Washington, D.C. Does it sound like I put that back? You know that?
Talk about surprising, going back to our first question. All right, I look forward to you starting these conversations. To circle back, though, to another part of the tax debate, which is the new promises that the president-elect has made. He wants to try to end taxes for tip workers, although the details are kind of TBD on that. He wants to look at tax benefits for overtime pay for Social Security. All these ideas have a fairly sizable Republican constituency, but a big price tag. How many of them can you reasonably hope to tackle in this bill, given what you said about, your high priorities for franchise owners and, on the corporate rate? Or is it really a question of let's just try to do what we can with the existing 2017 bill and tackle the new stuff later?
No, I think you have to look at You asked the question. If you have Republicans, as an example, that don't want to extend the tax code because that certain parts of it aren't paid for, or it's going to have it's going to increase $1 on the deficit, you can't get just one side of that belief or that statement. You have to actually also be able to stand up and willing to stand up in front of groups like this and across the world and all Americans and say, I don't want to do this because it adds $1 to the deficit on the margin, and so therefore we're going to raise your taxes $4.6 trillion. It's not going to go over very well. And so we have to be really cognizant of what we're saying when we say it. And a lot of times things are said in private that people aren't willing to go out into the public and state. But I'm one that I've said regarding, we've been doing these working groups, 10 of them for the last about 10 months now, from Chairman Smith of Ways and Means, dividing these all up, looking at them. As I described sort of my skinny car a minute ago about how we move the economy forward, I think we have to look at things we need to add and subtract from the TCJA, modify, adjust, or add in. And it could be, as we're going through this process, that we add in things like no tax on tips, or no tax on Social Security, or no tax on overtime, how we're going to deal with SALT. These are all things that were, SALT was obviously in the original 2017, but it's set to expire. When it expires at the end of 25, there will be $1 trillion of additional taxes that will be paid out of the federal treasury. So those are pay-fors. So we got to find a way to get everybody together, and that's why the one bill gives everybody something. And nobody, as Ronald Reagan said, nobody gets 100%. This place fusses and fights over 100% all the time, the perfect, but it's really an 80-20 rule. How do I get 80% of what I want? And you're going to be more challenged. It's going to be obviously less of a challenge to do it in one bill than it is 2 or 3.
All right, fair enough. You mentioned, and this is something I don't want to forget, that you're a member of leadership now. How has that changed how you view kind of the whipping process here? Is your life filled with a lot more meetings? Do you see things from a different perspective? Now, obviously, the RSC is, I believe, the biggest single internal group anyway, so.
Yeah, I think when you look at all the caucuses, whether it's Republican Study Committee, which I purposefully made sure that it wasn't a political caucus, the largest it's ever been in history, 180 members, which was about 80% of the entire conference, from all the different other caucuses, Freedom Caucus, Problem Solvers, Main Street, Republican Governance Group. So we had a plethora. It was sort of a safe haven where people of all the caucuses could come every week. Every Wednesday at 12:30, have a lunch. Special guests, Chad Wolf, Stephen Muller. I mean, the list goes on. Tom Holman, so many others in the space of border topics that are relevant. Jonathan Turley, just the list goes on. So people could come listen to policy ideas from very different perspectives and be able to take that back to their more political caucuses. And by the way, we didn't have to worry about getting votes. So I tell people the Republican Study Committee was, if everybody had an R+20 district, that you could go out and say, this is the Super Bowl of conservatism. But with the Policy Committee chair, I have to look at what policy matches the politics of the moment so we can get the votes to continue moving the football down the field. And so it's a completely different perspective. Doesn't mean that the policies are different, but how do you do them in a way incrementally that we can continue to advance the ideology of conservatism?
Fascinating. So to pivot a little further afield, talk about Greenland for a minute. Several of your colleagues recently introduced legislation that would allow the president-elect to begin sort of acting on his stated interest in greater U.S. control there. What do you make of that? Would you support that bill? Do you think it might require more study?
So I'm always one that says, once the bill hits the floor, then I will, once we see the language, we'll go from there, because it'll get modified a few times. But you have to look at, again, there are changing times, and I know everybody thinks that President Trump is trying to, grow the United States of America, but there's actually a great article I just watched yesterday about the issue of Greenland goes all the way back to the early 1900s. So much so that in post-World War II, we used it when Denmark was invaded by Germany. We took over Greenland at that point in time and did a lot of top secret things through the 50s and 60s that even Denmark didn't know about on Greenland. And so this has been an issue that Truman dealt with, so many people. And I think what President Trump's done, and by the way, some have argued he should not do this in the press. Well, we tried the other way, trying to do it and through diplomacy, and that didn't work either. So we have to look at this. The Panama Canal, I was there actually in March. The outgoing president at that time, very American friendly, had actually removed China as the favored trading partner out of Panama because of corruption. The new president has brought China back in. So when you look at everything south of the Northern Triangle is all favored nation of China, not the United States. And that's 100%, that's 180 degrees from where it was just 40 years ago when the United States was the favored trading partner for all of those particular countries in South America. We have a real problem there. It's the fastest way. It saves literally days for our destroyers to move through and other military ships, but more importantly, commerce, moving from Europe or from Asia, moving to the East Coast or the West Coast. Very expensive tolls, $1 million for a passage for the 75 miles of the Panama Canal. We have to look at all these, and then you didn't mention Canada, but Canada's always a challenge. It'd be a big 51st state, that's all I know, so I'd be looking for...
Yeah, I figured you'd start with smaller
territories. Yeah, I might run for governor of that might be good. Yeah.
So it sounds like you're open at least to looking at it, although it's not quite clear whether this will get to the floor. I mean, as a member of leadership, do you think it has a chance?
Again, I think it's according to how it's laid out. You know, one of the things that I love about President Trump, he keeps everybody chasing the squirrels. You know, oh, squirrel, there goes a squirrel, and over here we're back here doing stuff. So I don't know if this, I mean, I think he's serious about this, but I also think, you know, these are about expanding the envelope. I'm a pilot, not a fighter pilot, but fly jets, and I appreciate the people who explored the edges of the envelope so that you know in your working, you know, your logbooks and your airplane manuals that you know that you don't exceed that. Well, he keeps pushing out, you know, as we shrink in our thought, he expands the thinking of all Americans and gets some people really excited about what he says, both positively and negatively. So I think that gives him a lot of more free time to work underneath here on some of the more simpler issues.
Interesting. That's a pretty good stylistic point about him. On another topic, but one that's quite relevant to your background, the nominee for Health Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., has proposed switching McDonald's back to beef tallow and away from seed oils, describing it as a healthier choice. Now, I don't know if you have an opinion on this partisan debate here.
I love it, by the way. Where's my Simplot, guys?
Do you think that's feasible? Is it something you think we should consider?
Oh, this is a longer story, but you know, it's one of those things. They actually beef tallow is, you know, blanched in fries. I'm really getting way out on the tips of my skis here, but I remember when it changed. I was, like I said, McDonald's from 1985 until 2021, and it was a big deal then to change to all vegetable oil.
Yes.
You know, personally, I think many of us that have been around a long time would appreciate that flavor that we lost a long time ago.
Absolutely, I've heard that. As far as the practicalities of it, also feasible?
Well, we'd have to check with our folks who actually do it. I wouldn't want to put them in a bind, but I think that I think we're going to look at a lot of stuff that, you know, we used to have a healthy nation, and now people question about the additives and stuff. So I think he's going to explore that. I love what President Trump said. I'm not sure his words in front of everybody. I'm not sure that I can go with everything that he says he wants to do, but we'll see what he has to say.
That's fair enough. You know, with our remaining time here, I just wanted to go back to the tax bill for one moment. And you mentioned the energy component, and I'd be remiss if I didn't bring that back up because you're from a very, very energy-friendly state. How do you see that portion of the package getting crafted? It seems like obviously a big unifier for Republicans on paper, but you know, again, you have these senators wanting to do a completely separate border and energy bill. How are those talks going on that particular component?
Yeah, when you go back and look at our number one legislative agenda item at the start of the Congress, the 118th, was H.R. 1, which was energy policy.
Yes.
And, you know, you have to, I think, start with the end in mind that there is a range that you want to operate in on a price per barrel so that you can maintain your infrastructure, maintain your, you know, operating at 75 to 90% capacity in your refineries. And that ranges from $60 to $80 a barrel. And if you start, you know, if you overproduce the United States and don't have export capabilities or markets to go to, then you're going to put that price to a place where the upstream folks, the drillers, are not going to want to do it. So there's going to be a great pushback. And that would arguably say that, gas would be down around $1.70, $1.80 a gallon. It's just not sustainable in this marketplace. We're probably getting close to a static number of, I don't know what the national average is, probably $2.75 to $3 a gallon. Probably if we just stop the inflationary side of that, that'd be great. But again, going back to Secretary Besant's idea of moving 3 million barrels extra per day, that's more about national security. It's about rebuilding allies around Europe, something that President Trump tried to do in his first term with Germany and building LNG ports and having appropriations to help them, and they didn't do it. And they had tremendous reliability on Russia. So what most don't know, that the Russia's funding of the Ukrainian war comes mainly from Europe buying natural gas from them. And they have, if it were cut off today, Russia has sold so much gas to Europe at such a price that they have about 7 years worth of cash on their balance sheet to continue to push the war in Ukraine. So again, if you look at all the major skirmishes in the world since the 70s, it's all around energy.
Got it. So it sounds like we can look forward to a lot of GOP agreement again, HR 1 style. Okay. Well, on that note, thank you so much for your time, Congressman Hearn. It was a pleasure.
Great to be with you.
Please welcome McDonald's USA President Joe Erlinger and Semafor co-founder and CEO Justin B. Smith.
Thank you, Joe. This is a great pleasure for me to welcome Joe Erlinger to the Semafor stage, which is also, as you know from coming here, the Gallup Great Hall, who are the hosts of Semafor. We've been growing our company here for the last couple of years, and so thank you to our Gallup friends. We never miss a chance to thank them. But Joe is not only the president of McDonald's, overseeing 14,000 McDonald's restaurants across the U.S., but prior to that, at his very young age, but prior to that, he was also running all of McDonald's wholly owned international stores, restaurants, which numbered 6,000 across the world. And so really, his experience truly spans the globe. But most importantly, he was an underclassman at Georgetown when I was a senior, and I never got a chance to meet him because I don't think he had been matriculated yet. So 2 Hoyas up here on the stage. Welcome, Joe. We're thrilled to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So McDonald's, just as a news person, and even us at Semafor, there are probably very few companies that have been sort of associated to or written about in the news, especially across this last presidential campaign. There were a lot of moments where, whether you invited them or not, McDonald's was right there, center stage. What was that like as the president of McDonald's, and how did you navigate these different challenges and opportunities?
Yeah, I saw a quote towards the end of the year that said that 2024 was the year of McDonald's. And that shocked me in many ways. I didn't think about that as even a possibility. But I think as a brand, we did find ourselves really in so many conversations that were happening within the United States in 2024. If you look to the start of the year, there's big discussions around inflation and value and affordability, something that's incredibly important for our customers. And we were sort of center stage within that conversation. And then we also found ourselves center stage in the political conversation as well, with both candidates affiliating themselves with our brand. 90% of the U.S. population goes to McDonald's at least one time a year. And we found that obviously both candidates talked fondly about going to McDonald's and being associated with McDonald's. I think the other
do they call you up and say, "Hey, Joe, we want to feature our McDonald's," or is it just inbound stuff that comes from the campaign trail?
We didn't know that Vice President Harris was going to reference McDonald's at the convention. Obviously, we knew she had spoken fondly about her time working with the brand many, many years ago for one of our franchisees, but we didn't know about that. And then, President-elect Trump reached out to one of our franchisees, and that's how that whole discussion went down. But at McDonald's, we refer to ourselves as not red, not blue, but golden, and that's how we're sticking. We're going to stick with that. Yeah, we're going to stick with that.
And I think even the first gentleman also worked at McDonald's. Someone said, and he was an employee of the month at some point.
He did work at McDonald's as well, is what I understand. And when you actually think about this, and I love to do this when I'm in a crowd, who here has worked at McDonald's? Okay, so you're not quite representative, because
the Beltway.
One in 8 members of the U.S. population has actually worked at McDonald's at some point. And so that is part of why I think we were in so many conversations in 2024, is because everyone can connect with McDonald's. We're ubiquitous across 14,000 communities. Everyone has had that McDonald's experience, I think, as a customer. And so it's something we're really proud of, in that someone who had an experience at McDonald's is now sitting in this room, sitting in many different rooms, having important discussions about the future of our country.
So overall, it's a positive rather than a negative, the fact that you're in every conversation.
I think that we have to embrace that. I do think we have to embrace the fact that that is the brand that we are, that is what we represent in the United States, and in many cases internationally as well, given my international experience with the company. And so, yeah, I think I view it as a positive.
Yeah, great. So speaking of news, and in that exact same vein, McDonald's made some headlines recently across the last couple of weeks, and on an issue that's getting a lot of attention in corporate America, which is some recent announcements about McDonald's positions on inclusion. Obviously, it's a sort of a headline issue with many companies revising their policies, et cetera, Meta, Walmart, many others. Do you want to provide some context on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of these conversations that strikes me, because the conversation becomes so short-term and focused on tactics and programs. But when I think about McDonald's, we have a 70-year history of being inclusive. It goes back to that 1 in 8 members of the U.S. population has worked at McDonald's. We serve 90% of the U.S. population in a year. We operate in 14,000 communities. Our founders talked about the fact that they wanted a franchisee base that represented the communities in which we operate. We have an incredibly diverse franchisee base that represents the communities in which we operate. We view this as a competitive advantage for us. And so the short-term discussions about use of language or tactics or programs, it's not what I personally connect to as I think about this topic. It is part of our values that we open our doors to everyone and that we're inclusive. And I also view it as a competitive advantage. And so our commitment to inclusivity will sustain regardless of what the conversation is, I think, about language or tactics or programs.
So the overall strategies are not changing. It's just some different ways of framing how to reach your various objectives.
That's right. I mean, we had some aspirational goals out there, many of which we actually achieved. And so while we're retiring many of those aspirational goals, the work that we're doing is ongoing. I don't think we can view this as something where you're done or finished. But again, where do we continue to find a competitive advantage through being an inclusive brand?
Great. So let's talk about the franchise economy, and obviously it was great having the member up here who was a former franchise owner of McDonald's. But you started, I think, in 2021 a new franchisee recruitment program, and I'm just curious, could you walk us through how that program's been implemented, what the results have been, how is this creating more opportunities for entrepreneurs and small business owners across the U.S.?
Thanks for this question. Very important. And I want to acknowledge, obviously, that the International Franchise Association is sponsoring us today. They've been incredibly supportive and helpful to McDonald's. And remember, franchising is across many multiple industries. So thank you very much to the IFA. So I took on my role at the very end of 2019. And franchising is our business. And I inherited a pipeline of new franchisees that was 6. 6 people were going to become new franchisees at McDonald's in 2020. And
That was a waiting list or approval, an application
yeah,
pipeline?
those are the people who were in training and were going to take over stores in 2020. 6.
And had that been at a low number for many years?
It had been 6 to 10 for many, many years.
Okay.
And I had this vision that that's not where McDonald's should be. We actually should have a franchisee base that is green and growing, is bringing new thinking to our business, might be more forward-looking on topics like digital or even topics like sustainability. And so we embarked upon this effort in earnest in 2021 to really create a stronger franchisee base through recruiting new franchisees who did not have any former affiliation with McDonald's. And it was interesting what we found. One of the things that we found is many people didn't think McDonald's was recruiting new franchisees anymore. And so it took us several years actually to overcome this barrier of thinking that McDonald's was not open for new franchisees. This past year, we actually put 40 franchisees, almost 40 franchisees, I think it was 39, into business. And I think that'll grow by 50% to nearly 60 in 2025. We think that's great for, yeah, thank you. Yeah, we think that's great for business. We obviously know that's great for these entrepreneurs who are seeking this opportunity. Our founders talked about being a franchisee means you're in business for yourself, but not by yourself. I think it's a great quote, and it is something that I'm really passionate about. I saw one of these franchisees that's new to McDonald's in the last year yesterday in a meeting that I was at in Nashville. And the energy and optimism that these new franchisees bring to the table is tremendous. And they bring new thinking about the opportunities they see. They look forward to representing McDonald's in the communities and where we operate. And so it is something that we will continue to do. I'm seeing the benefits of it. New franchising is alive at McDonald's, and I'm really proud of this.
And so how many franchisees across the U.S.?
We've got about 2,000 right now.
2,000, okay. And so was there a period of time going back 5, 10 years, 20 years when there was a kind of a boom in franchise applications and then it slowed down recently?
Yeah, that's right. So I've been with the company for 22 years, and there was a time early in my tenure where we stopped adding new franchisees from outside of the company, or at least slowed significantly. And we started, and we continue to do this, adding next generation franchisees as well as spousal franchisees as well. In fact, I interacted yesterday with a 4th generation McDonald's franchisee. So this is an opportunity actually to build multi-generational wealth. And I think that's a really important thing to know about McDonald's and its franchisees. But yes, we had largely stopped. We had stopped adding franchisees, and I again think that people coming from the outside who bring new ideas, bring new thinking, inject new energy into our McDonald's system is really part of what we're about.
And what's been the main kind of lever to go from 6 to 40?
Yeah, a few things. First, we needed to declare that we're open for business because I think there were a lot of people out there that didn't think McDonald's was accepting new franchisees. We also made a commitment to help those who didn't necessarily have the economic means to get into McDonald's, but ticked every other box to help them get into McDonald's as a franchisee. So we made a $250 million commitment utilizing our balance sheet to support franchisees in the process of getting loans from banks. And we've now achieved and fully utilized that $250 million commitment over the last 4 years. We found other means along the way to figure out how to support people to get into business, and we're going to utilize those going forward.
Fantastic. Now, so we started off about the ubiquity of McDonald's in the culture, in the political conversation, the policy conversation. And so I know that McDonald's faces a whole waterfront of policy issues day in and day out. When do you choose to sort of let things sort of flow over you, and when do you choose to engage?
I think first of all, it is important to actually stand for something and say yes to certain things. And I think at times businesses find themselves as being the voice of no on so many topics. And let me talk about the minimum wage discussion that's happened in this country. There was a time when McDonald's was actually opposed to all minimum wage legislation many, many years ago. We then decided we would stay quiet and neutral. Under my leadership, I actually decided that there's nothing wrong with good common sense minimum wage legislation. And I've been the only executive within my industry who's come out in support of good minimum wage legislation. And so I think you got to start with what you might believe in. And then I also think you got to really make sure you defend the things that you stand for. One of the things that we really stand for is franchising. And we've seen attacks on the franchise business model, specifically in California with some legislation that would threaten our ability to have second, third, fourth generation franchisees. And so we came out strongly against that. And there's a few other places in the country, largely at the state or local level, where we see similar threats. And we will be strong with a coalition of partners, because it doesn't just impact McDonald's, it impacts the franchise businesses throughout this country.
And as we sort of face a big change and shift in the political dynamics here in Washington, how does McDonald's view the policy landscape that's started already and going to be formally launched next week?
Yeah, it does sound like something's happening in this city next week, I guess. Yeah, it seems like there's preparations going on everywhere.
And I wasn't going to ask you whether you had any franchisees in Greenland. I didn't think that.
We don't have any franchisees in Greenland, but we would consider that. In terms of the regulatory environment, I talked about obviously the ubiquity of McDonald's, and so much touches us. I mean, discussion about tariffs, we need to make sure we're aware of that. Discussions about the incoming Health and Human Services Secretary and what he might do in terms of food and food additives, we need to be focused on that. Certainly labor discussions, we need to be aware and focused on that. So there are so many different areas that we will engage on and we're going to be watching and participating in. But I guess I would offer two things. And I reached this conclusion when I was a young, up-and-coming executive at McDonald's. And the Affordable Care Act passed back in 2010. And this is not about the Affordable Care Act, but it is about how it was implemented. It was voted in 2010, but I don't think it was fully implemented until 2013 or 14, if I remember correctly. And so there's two things about that really helped business, and specifically, I think, franchise businesses and small businesses. One was that time. It gave the opportunity for businesses to plan. So that time between 2010 and 2013 or 14, I remember having lots of discussions with our franchisees who were trying to figure out how they would navigate through the Affordable Care Act. The other thing that was really important is it created a common level playing field for everybody. Very important for business. I think sometimes you find regulatory bodies picking winners and losers, and I don't think that's a good role for business. I don't think that helps small businesses in this country. So those are the two things that we'll continue to advocate for, regardless of what the regulation might be, because I think a business like McDonald's and our franchisees can navigate through most things, provided that those two elements are in place.
Great. Well, I know we're running out of time, but I just thought I'd end with a sort of a more personal question just about the work that you do. Obviously, McDonald's is a part of everyone's lives in some shape or form if you're in this country. But what it is about being the president of McDonald's and the work that you do that you love, about the brand, the efforts you're spearheading, and I guess what do you want people to understand about the company that maybe we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about one of the big things, which is everyone thinks about McDonald's as a big business, but it's really a coalition of small businesses because of our franchise model and because of the fact that there's a Mr. and Ms. McDonald's that represents every community in which they operate, and that's so important. And I think that is connected with what I find so special about the brand. And I'm sure I'd been to McDonald's before, but I'll tell you my first real memory of McDonald's. It was when I was 6 years old. I had made the all-star team of my local T-ball team. and the coach was the local franchisee of the McDonald's. And after the game, and I don't remember if we won or lost actually, we got to go to McDonald's. There was a special line set up for all the players. We could order whatever we wanted, and we didn't have to pay. And I think I had my first apple pie then. Remember they were fried back then? Does anyone remember that? But what was so special is that I now recognize it was a community gathering point. It was making memories around a table with food. And so it was that franchisee figuring out how to give back as well. Giving back to that T-ball team created a lasting memory for me. And that franchisee's son is now a franchisee, and I'm actually going to see him later this week. And so, and his son was on the baseball team with me. It's that sort of connection that I think our brand creates that's very special.
Great. Well, listen, Joe Erlinger, President of McDonald's, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Please welcome Semafor White House correspondent Shelby Talcott and Semafor Senior Washington Editor Alana Shore.
So everyone, unfortunately, Stephen Moore is unable to join us this morning on short notice. So instead, I have a treat. The interviewer is going to be interviewed by me. I have with me Semafor's first ever White House correspondent, Shelby Talcott. And instead of her chatting with Stephen, I thought I'd throw her a couple of questions, specifically to get the White House vantage point on some of the issues we've been discussing. Shelby, you have a story out this morning that talks about the two kind of main forces in tension influencing Trump's economic identity, like kind of represented by Elon Musk on the more corporate friendly side and Steve Bannon on the more pro-populist, anti-elite side. Talk a little bit about that and how you see that animating this term.
Well, I think what's really notable is Donald Trump really won this election on a lot of populist ideas. He proposed no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. He's weighed extending the child tax credit. And so there's this sort of quiet war brewing between the true populists in Steve Bannon, who has also proposed raising taxes on the rich, something that is probably not going to happen, and some of the more corporate traditional Republicans. And so I think that's going to be something that's going to be really interesting to see is how far can Donald Trump take these populist policies and how far some of these traditional Republicans in Congress are willing to go. And we've talked to a lot of Republicans, lawmakers who still have questions over a lot of Donald Trump's policies, no tax on tips. People are open to it, but they want to see guardrails and they want to know how some things are going to be paid for. So that's going to be a really big challenge for Donald Trump to actually implement a lot of these proposals that he has promised.
On that note, one thing that really struck me from my conversation with Congressman Hearn was when I asked about one bill versus two bills, he kind of just said, well, we have a lot to do surrounding the March expiration of government funding and also debt limit. None of this is wrong. But just the same, as a seasoned observer of Trump world, how is that going to play if Congress doesn't get around to tackling this tax bill until like the summer, given all that other stuff?
Well, that's another debate going on inside Trump's world is whether to do the tax bill right away as one big, beautiful bill, as Donald Trump says, or to push it down and do it a little bit later in the year. And there's concern among Trump allies that doing it later in the year and putting it off will result in essentially more problems and more drama brewing. And if they're able to force this whole entire thing along with border control, along with all of these other initiatives, that it'll be able to get through easier because there will be so much more stuff in these bills that essentially Congress won't have time to pick things apart and have problems with every little detail.
Congress is known for doing that. To ask you kind of a version of a question I asked Congressman Hearn, because it always tends to surprise me, the answers, what is the most unexpected or lesser known aspect to Trump's world that you wish kind of your readers knew more about? Because there's, the sense of them and then there's who they really are when you talk to them.
I think I think what's surprising is how, they understand the game this time around. I think when they came in during the first administration, they were surprised. I've talked to a lot of Trump allies who were there during his first administration and who are still there in his second administration, and they openly admit that they did not expect to win the first election. And so they came in unprepared. They came in with a lot of Trump allies, people who Donald Trump liked, but who didn't necessarily have the experience. This time around, they are far more organized. You have Susie Wiles as chief of staff. She has survived in Donald Trump's orbit for years in a way that a lot of other people don't, because she knows how to deal with Donald Trump and how to push and pull and when to give in. And so I think what's going to be notable this time around that people don't necessarily realize is Trump will be far more successful because of the people he has picked around him. They are far more organized and far more disciplined than in his first term.
That's really interesting in and of itself. Do you see that also potentially affecting his relationships with the rest of the party? Like, will there kind of be a strange new respect, so to speak, for this level of organization, or too soon to tell?
It's a little bit too soon to tell, but I do think that he has, we've talked to lawmakers who have dealt with him since 2016, and they've said that he has changed a little bit. Now, his allies in the incoming administration will say he is dealing with everything in the same way. But you have seen sort of a Donald Trump who is more willing to, so far, step back, right? I'm thinking about last year with the spending bill fight. He pushed and ultimately did not get that debt ceiling that he wanted to, but he still backed House Speaker Mike Johnson. And this time around, with the one bill versus two bill reconciliation, he has sort of said, yes, I prefer one big bill, but if two bills is how we're going to get it done, that's how we're going to get it done. That's a very different Donald Trump than his first administration.
Very good point and fascinating insight. Thank you for filling in on short notice and being willing to be interviewed. And that's all we got, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Please welcome back Semafor General Manager and Global Head of Public Affairs, Bennett Richardson.
Thank you so much to Congressman Hearn, to McDonald's President Joe Erlinger, and to Shelby and Alana. So sorry that Stephen couldn't join us. For more scoops from Shelby on the Trump transition and inauguration, make sure that you're subscribed to Semafor Principles, and that's where you'll hear about the rest of our upcoming event slate as well. So thanks again for joining us, everyone, and have a great rest of the week.